just in glancing around, I may be the only individual here who was here before the meetings got started that Elder Beach had. I would have been, Dick would have been about the same age, Bob Gunner and all, but I'm in as a part of the church family before the meeting started. Some of you may have heard what I'm going to try to summarize because it draws largely from the history of the church that I wrote for the 50th anniversary, which was in 1996. This latest monograph that Gordon had put together puts the Waynesboro Church in some context with the greater area round about us, although there are some gaps in information that was supplied to him. One of the biggest ones being that for the Hagerstown Church, even the Hagerstown Church history that they supplied did not even mention the large Chautauqua effort that Harold Metcalf had held in the old WJEJ auditorium in Hagerstown in 1945. That was the biggest effort that probably had been held in Hagerstown. What I have to present concentrates specifically here on the Waynesboro Church and pre, present, and perhaps post, because I need your help in finishing out some pieces. We know for a certainty that there was an Adventist presence here in this part of Franklin County, Washington Township, and Waynesboro, back perhaps as early as 1910. There was a lay evangelist colporteur by the name of Ernest Numbers who moved into a log cabin with it, he and his wife and 4 daughters, into a small log cabin out in Rousersville. And I located a relative of his one time, and I told him, I said, I can't point to the exact spot, but I can show you within 1 mile of where your grandfather was born. And he kind of smiled. Later on, I had the occasion to take him and to show him. Then he realized if you stood in one spot in Rousersville, you went 1 mile this way, you were out of town. If you went 1 mile this way, you were out of town. So I was safe. I could show him within 1 mile of where his grandfather was born. But Ernest Numbers canvassed in this area. He would be gone all week long, and his wife was tending 4 daughters, children that they had, was carrying their 5th child. When he was born, he was a boy. So the girls probably attended the Rousersville Elementary School for a couple of years. How long he was here, we don't really know. When Elder Beach was holding the effort here in Waynesboro, he and his Bible workers discovered that there were some Adventist Spirit of Prophecy books in several homes that they had visited. Now these were old editions. Great controversy was probably the 1888 edition and that sort. Nothing was ever solidly able to be pinned down as to where, how, and when those books were distributed in this area. There was also anecdotal talk about there having been a previous evangelistic series that was held in a meeting hall up over the old Beck and Benedict hardware store, the one that was downtown in Waynesboro, near where Valerie Monterey's office is now. But we could never pin down an exact date to that. All that we do know is we know for an absolute certainty that Ernest Numbers and his family lived here in this area. How do we know? His son's birth certificate, 1912, when the child was born. And then things kind of really go blank as far as the history is concerned. Where Elder Numbers went and just what he did after he was here in this area, don't really know exactly. I do know this much is fact. He suddenly shows up again in Williamsport, Pennsylvania, and Drums, Pennsylvania. He's holding an evangelistic effort up there. How do we know? My father happened to be a school teacher in the Williamsport, Drums area, and my father was Elder Numbers' tent master, Bible worker, jack of all trades, etc., when he was holding those meetings up there. So there are certain things that there are waymarks that we can pin down exactly, but we can't put everything into as tight a package as we would like to. Once again, the scene kind of goes blank. What it demonstrates is that God is willing to be patient. He's willing to be very patient. The information that Gordon has highlights something that I did not know. I knew that there had been literature that had been distributed in the Blue Ridge Summit, Highfield, Pennersville area back in the early 1930s. What I did not know was that there were 2 or 3 churches that were doing this at the same time. Whether it was coordinated or not, I do not know. We know for a fact from information that's been provided from the Hagerstown area that a couple of the churches over there were going up to the resort area on the top of the mountain and distributing literature. We also know independently that the West Wilmington, Delaware church, a couple of 100 miles away, had a pastor who, like lots of churches do, accumulate a room of excess literature. So they determined that they were going to give this literature out. They were going to go out to the frontier. This was the frontier. Most of you here recognize the fact that Blue Ridge Summit, Penmar, Pennersville area was the playground, the summer resort area for Baltimore, Washington, and Philadelphia. Penmar Park had been built by the railroad to be an excursion point. Weekends, the mountain was literally filled to gridlock with excursion trains. And so they independently, the West Wilmington Church and churches from the Hagerstown area were distributing literature up there. The Hagerstown district was pastored by Elder E.L. Hanson, Edward Hanson. We knew later on that there was a series of meetings that was held in the Pennersville area as a result of or by Elder Hanson. But who was Elder Hanson? We didn't really pin it down until this information surfaced from the Hagerstown district. Elder Hanson, at that point in the early 30s, was the pastor of the Hagerstown, Pondsville, Smithsburg district. And then later, about 1935 or thereabouts, when he held this set of meetings up in Pennersville, my speculation is that he had been moved to the conference office as a conference evangelist. Anyway, the Chesapeake Conference had sent him into that area. He had held meetings and had about 20 baptisms. And that's where Gordon Alexander's parents were baptized, plus some other members of the family, plus others that some of you might remember, Pearl West and Roy Shockey and his family, and some others in the area there. There's another branch to that story we won't even touch that finally culminated with the establishment of Highland View Academy, but we haven't got time to go that way, concentrating on Waynesboro. Pardon me. So Elder Hanson held this series of meetings in the Pennersville area, and there was no church here in Waynesboro, apparently no attempt to establish a church, and so people that had joined from that set of meetings actually wound up dispersing through several of the congregations in on the Maryland side of the line in the Chesapeake Conference. Later, this came to coalesce. My parents moved into this area in 1943 from the Tacoma Park area right after the start of World War II, and they became members of the Smithsburg Church also. Well, that's where my parents met Luther Alexander and his wife, and Roy Shockey and others. It developed that there were about 12.5 church members that lived in the general Pennsylvania area. And gradually over time, about the close of World War II, independently, 3 in particular of those members had decided that it would be good to try to reach out and have a series of meetings and establish a church in Waynesboro. So once again, even though they all attended the same church in Smithsburg, they didn't know what, the right hand didn't know what the left hand was doing. So my dad was communicating with the East Pennsylvania Conference and petitioning them to send an evangelist into this area of Waynesboro. Luther Alexander was writing letters petitioning the Pennsylvania Conference to send an evangelist into this area. Does anybody here, besides possibly Richard, remember Brother Dye and his wife? Okay, all right, there are several of you here. Well, old Brother Dye and his wife lived on Ridge Road up in Shady Grove area. They were petitioning the Pennsylvania Conference to send an evangelist into this Waynesboro area here. Finally, apparently, the conference felt, well, maybe the Holy Spirit's trying to tell us something. They had an evangelist, Harold Veach, who was going to be holding a series of meetings in the York, Pennsylvania area, not too long distant. And so either before or during the time that he was doing those meetings, they sent Elder Veach over to Waynesboro to look over the lay of the land and see what the prospects were. And he met with my dad and Brother Alexander and Brother Dye and maybe some others. And they decided that, and finally the conference office agreed to sponsor the meetings. A problem developed in that where would they hold the meetings? They agreed that they wanted a, quote, good-sized hall, good-sized meeting room. So they tried this place and that place that had varying capacities from 1 to 300 people. Everything was either full, committed, or there was prejudice in the area against Seventh-day Adventists, and that stood as a roadblock. Finally, the only thing that remained open, and the only thing that had possibility, was the National Guard Armory out on North Grant Street. And when they went to take a look at this was a cavernous-sized auditorium. It was actually the indoor drill area that they had in the armory there. Big open ceiling. The acoustics in it were, I'm remembering what a 10-year-old might have remembered, because that's how old I was at the time. But I'm remembering that the acoustics in that building were similar to the acoustics in the farm show arena. Horrible, horrible, absolutely. This was the only place that was available. They decided to, and finalized arrangements to utilize the building. To conquer the acoustical difficulties, they had to go in there with great big painter's tarps and hang them as baffles from the rafters in the auditorium there. And the stage that they built was kind of freestanding way out. Once again, visualize the farm show arena floor, not the seats, but just the floor area, as being potentially about the floor area that was available here. They brought a lot of chairs in and set them up. They worked hard. I know how hard my dad worked, and Elder Veach was working on this. By then he had finished his meetings in New York, and the meetings were scheduled to start the first week in January. And the closer that the time came, like with everything, there was last-minute pressure, last-minute jobs that had to be done. And everything was going well as could be expected, till the last minute, and a snowstorm came. The night before, the meetings were to start. And it was somewhere between a 4 and 8 inch snowstorm. Now, snow clearing wasn't the same as it is today, but neither were people as skittish about getting out and driving in deep snow then as they may be today. Still, there was serious concern about what the attendance might be. Everybody recognized that the devil was trying to throw a curve, trying to throw a roadblock in the way. And there was a lot of prayer that went up over the matter. And the night that the meetings were to start, I know my dad went early. Only had one car, so the whole family had to go early as well. Elder Veach came in early. My goodness, when you pulled into the parking area at the armory there were already cars there, cars continuing to come. They opened the doors, and the count that's been given afterwards was that there were 700 people there in attendance that night. 700 people. God answered prayers. God put the devil to the rout. Now you say, well, can we do the same thing today? With God's blessing, yes, anything is possible. But there was a different mindset in the area at that time than there is in society today. Of course, in 1946, there wasn't the distraction of television, for instance. And with it having been the country coming right out of World War II, at the tail end there was, and that there being a greater literacy about Bible prophecy in the population in general, there were a lot of questions that people had about Bible prophecy, and there was a lot of interest in things spiritual in general. There is a story about there having been a heavy discussion in another church at one point, and it was over the matter of baptism by immersion, where they almost had a riot. Not a riot from the standpoint of fighting, but just general confusion, because so many people had packed into one of the churches downtown that it broke the banister, broke the staircase down, and just general confusion. So this was the basic mindset or culture that Elder Veach came into when he was starting these meetings here. In preparation for the meetings, a lot of handbills, a lot of literature had been passed out for weeks in advance and during the 13 weeks of the meetings. That meant that every week that the same territory was covered with a brochure put in at each house in town and in some of the other towns, listing the meetings for the coming week. And my father had volunteered to be responsible to cover the town of Greencastle. That meant I got volunteered as well. You have to remember now, I was 10 years old. And my dad had been a colporteur. He wasn't afraid to walk, and he knew how to walk, and he walked fast. It was difficult for me to keep up with him. So finally he devised a plan. He trusted me. Well, he would do this, and he'd send me off to do a certain area of a couple of streets, so and so here, and then we'd meet coming back. Every week we covered, he and I alone, covered the entirety of Greencastle. Now, Greencastle wasn't as large as it is today, but you still figure the area from Route 11 east to the stockyards, and on the north side from the swimming pool south to the area of the fire hall here now. We covered that basic territory there. I have to admit that as a 10-year-old, I got tired. My legs got tired. And Dad was committed that we had to give all of that literature out. It was either to cover every house or go until we ran out of literature. Well, I decided that if one invitation was good, why 2 invitations might be better. And if 2 were better, what about 3? So I will have to acknowledge that towards the end of that 13 weeks, there were some houses that got 4 and 5 or more invitations to the meetings. But you know, it's interesting. There were a number of individuals that came to the meetings that joined the church from the Greencastle area, in spite of my efforts on there. So Elder Beach held the 13-week series. He really got himself involved and established here in this area, in the community. He bought a house. Actually, the house that I have to digress. Kenny Hollinger's mother and father used to live in the large brick house that's just on the upper side, the northeast side of where Kenny's pattern shop is. And Elder Beach had been told that the house where Kenny's pattern shop is, that house was for sale. And he bought that house and lived in it the entirety of the meetings. Well, when Elder Beach moved out, the Hollingers were apparently looking to downsize, so the Hollingers bought Elder Beach's house and then sold the other house in there. But why did I go there? I don't remember. It'll come to me here in a moment. Elder Beach had established himself. Elder Beach was well thought of in the community. I had indicated that there was some residual prejudice. Yes. There was a doctor here in town who had prejudice towards Seventh-day Adventists. He had married a Seventh-day Adventist lady who had actually been in nurses training with my mother. When my folks moved here in 1943, they went looking, saw his name, recognized it. My mother and her classmate were reunited without ever knowing just what was happening there. That doctor also happened to be the chairman of the local school board, and that was what had blocked the potential use of the high school auditorium. We now say providentially, because God knew that the high school auditorium would no way have held as many people as 700 people that showed up. There was opposition from some other pastors in the Waynesboro area, particularly the Waynesboro Ministerium, and there have been some pictures that have scrolled up here showing some of the newspaper ads, and even a picture of one individual pastor from another denomination who was imported to counteract, to rebut, to prove that Elder Beach was wrong. Well, I just learned today that that man either was, let's put it this way, there is an individual by that name who is listed on the website as having been convicted of moral turpitude, inappropriate behavior with young females 10 years before the meetings were ever held here in Waynesboro. So this was the kind of character that was sent in to try to counteract Elder Beach. Well, Elder Beach had a little bit of a secret weapon up his sleeve. You remember Arthur Brandt and his wife Anna here? Well, Anna Brandt had come from the York district. In fact, her maiden name was Fitzke. So you may remember the Fitzkys in York there. She was one of his Bible workers here, and she also had secretarial capabilities. So this was the days of hand transcribing, shorthand, stenographers. So Elder Veach just had Anna Fitzky at that time go to this man's meetings. She faithfully took down every word that he said. Later she transcribed it for Elder Veach, and he had a hard copy then of everything that man had been saying at his meetings there. Not a whole lot came of that opposition. The man really couldn't establish hard credibility. But there were other influences that were favorable in town. There was a lawyer in Waynesboro here, Jewish background, and he worked for or worked to influence in favor of Elder Veach being able to hold these meetings. There may be a picture. Gordon, did you have a picture of that big sandwich board that was on the square in Waynesboro? Well, picture a sandwich board like somebody might carry, only this thing was big. It sat in the corner of the square over where the First National M&T Bank is now there. But it would have spanned about this far, and it would have been taller than I could reach. It was imposing. And it was there for the entirety of the 13 weeks plus some time listing, and was changed every week for the meetings that came. And there was some opposition on the town council to the board being there for any number of reasons that anybody could think up on. But this lawyer had his office in that corner there next to the bank. I think it was sat right in the area where that little brick plaza is now. And so he gave them permission to put the board in that area. Now it was on private property. There wasn't anything they could do about it. There is one letter to the local editor that Gordon heads in this from a Charles Menser. There had been letters to the editors in the Record Herald and that sort of thing. And Charles Menser, commonly known as Charlie Menser, had written a letter in support of the more from the standpoint in support of religious freedom. He wasn't, at that point, he wasn't pro-H.R. Veach or anti-H.R. Veach. But what made it significant was that Charlie Menser was one of 2, 3, or 4 members of the Waynesboro police force, as nice a man as you could ever hope to find, and so well thought of in the community that I believe, this is just my personal belief, I believe that the influence of his letter in the newspaper with people that recognized his name and what he had to say was as great, if not greater, than some of the individuals that sat on the borough council. Needless to say, when the meetings were finished, Elder Veach held a series of baptisms. Baptisms were all held down here in the Antietam Creek, just above Goods Dam, in the general area across from the Antietam shelter, Humane Society shelter, between there and where it joins Lyons Road, but back against the creek, and you've seen pictures with the tents there and such. The first Sabbath, Elder Veach baptized 57 individuals by himself. He was wearing a pair of fishing waders. They were chest high, but still, every time when he baptized a candidate, and he went down, he dipped anywhere from a cup to a quart and a half of water. By the time he finished baptizing 57 individuals, his waders were filled up to here, and it took two of the strongest men in the congregation to help pull him up out of the creek in there. There were subsequent baptisms held. I personally was baptized on the second week there. Total of 96 members were listed as charter members when the church was organized. Now, originally, the group met in a smaller anteroom hall at the Armory, not the big room. And then later, they met in different areas around town. When this property was purchased, there was a Quonset hut that was erected, would be back here just about where the entrance to our parking lot is now, and the church then was started. That was in 1940. Well, the cornerstone here says 1949, so the basement was started in 47 or 48 in there. And there's a history to this particular property that we haven't got time to go into. Needless to say that over the years, 70 years, Elder Woodruff had referred to it, there have been ups and downs. There's been cyclicals as far as church membership is concerned. And I stand with him, as I indicated in Sabbath school this morning. What are we still doing here? When we look at, there are a lot of good things that have happened, and God is blessed in a lot of ways. But when you look at beginning membership, current membership, we aren't that far away from where we started. And as I demonstrated this morning, if you look at the potential, without throwing stones, but just if you look at the potential of what might have been, had the church worked diligently, we wouldn't be here today.